We're going to cover a few different things today. Of course, a rhetorical question to start. What is a tech lead? Defining a bit what the different technical disciplines are, when and why to switch between them, what changes when you switch between disciplines, what stays the same, and sort of at the end, a bit of personal retrospective on, is this change I made, was it worth it for me? So part one, what is a tech lead? Does anyone want to offer a guess? No? No guesses. There are wrong answers, if that makes anyone more likely to raise their hand. Yeah, so someone with technical expertise who leads the team in terms of architecture and so forth. Did I get that right, repeating it? Awesome. So that's pretty close to the definition I have. So start off, a tech lead is usually a senior engineer. Someone with the title of like senior or staff. But otherwise, seniority is sort of orthogonal to the role of technical leadership. They have leadership responsibilities on their team. So someone who's trusted to lead projects that have other engineers working on them. A tech lead is someone who's usually not a manager. They can sometimes manage a couple people. This is called being a tech lead slash manager, or a TLM. It's the hot new thing for organizations that can't make up their mind how they want to structure their org chart. But usually a tech lead is an individual contributor on their team, and they're responsible for setting technical direction more than anyone else on the team. Writing design docs, being the final approver over architectural decisions. They're usually the person who engineers on other teams and product managers and other cross-functional partners are. This is the person that those people are coming to talk to. So, you may be a tech lead if you spend more time writing and reviewing documents than writing code. If your manager sort of defers technical decision making to you. If your calendar has more meetings with people outside the team on it than people on the team. Or just if your calendar has more meetings than you like and you say, wow, I never have time to write code anymore. How did that happen? And yeah, again, you act as your team's technical representative without sort of needing your manager in the room for authority. So before we move on, just a show of hands if anyone feels like that sort of describes them. No need to be timid. Be proud raising your hand. That's a good role to have on your team. Okay, so to talk about switching disciplines, we sort of first need to examine what technical disciplines even are. So just getting it out of the way here, different programming languages are not different disciplines. If you go from writing a server that's written in Java to a server that's written in Go, you're not switching disciplines, you're just changing up the language that you use. So a couple of examples of technical disciplines. Building mobile or native client apps, doing backend server development, being in DevOps, maintaining databases, maintaining networks, writing web applications, building web UI, and a bunch of other things. But what sets those different disciplines apart from each other is they all have different fundamental challenges. They all have different things that really define what it is. So what is it, I started off doing mobile development, building iOS apps, and sort of these were like the really key constraints that you internalize really quickly. If you're building a mobile app, it runs on your users' devices. and you have really limited resources, and you're building something that's highly interactive. And, that set of constraints is pretty different than building a React web app, or building some batch processing service, or maintaining databases. It's just a really different set of constraints. So after working in that space for a long time, I sort of got the intuition to make sure that the code I wrote and the designs I came up with fit into those constraints. You'd learn to, like, if you're building some UI for an iOS app, you don't run, network calls on the main thread. That all has to be done in the background. Otherwise, your users aren't going to be able to tap buttons and stuff like that. And so after doing that for a while and really internalizing those things, great. I'm a senior engineer. I know what would work and what wouldn't, and you sort of get that with experience. There's another way, I guess, to think about the different technical disciplines, which is what's in the title on, your job listing. So chances are your job, and unless you're at a very small company, only will fit into like one of these buckets. Being a back-end engineer, or being a security engineer, or being a full stack developer. Just to pause, I do find it really funny that like being a full stack developer is a very specific thing, and not really full stack. I found that funny for years, and we still haven't changed the terminology. Working on compilers is a different job, as is, being a build engineer. So after many, many years building iOS apps, I switched over to being an iOS build engineer and had that be my full-time job, and supporting like 100 different iOS engineers, and making their builds fast and keeping CI running and responding to fires every other week when one of those two things stopped being the case. So even though I was still sort of building for the same platform, all the stuff I was doing was still about iOS. It was a really different technical discipline, because the challenges in the space had changed. It was now about, like, how can we shave minutes off of build time instead of how can we build this shiny new feature. It was knowing about how the build tools worked. What would make binary sizes bigger versus smaller instead of the platform frameworks. Like, how do I make this button look shiny? And that was a pretty big change. The new challenges were fun. It was definitely a more scoped down space. There are a lot more iOS engineers than there are iOS build engineers, and then there's like an order of magnitude more like back-end engineers than there are iOS engineers. So just again, I like doing this in case you can't tell. Quick show of hands, who here has switched between one or more of these disciplines at some point in their career? Again, with the timid hand raising, it's not. These aren't bad things. Yeah, that's a fair few of you. So on to the next part then, which is when and why to switch. So this talk is specifically about what it's like to switch disciplines as a tech lead, sort of putting those two things together. Why? Because I feel like a lot of people change things up early in their career. That's probably when it's the easiest. It's the time in your career when you're like most focused on writing code and you're expected to still be learning, and there are more senior people on the team. For example, if you're doing an internship or it's your first job out of school, you take whatever job is available, and you're probably not super picky about it. And even if it's something new, that's expected. A lot of people also switch when new disciplines emerge. So, for example, when the iPhone SDK was released, you had a lot of people becoming iPhone developers for the first time because you couldn't be an iPhone developer before then. When like React started to get really popular on the web, you had a lot of people starting to become, front-end web developers who hadn't worked in that space before. When SRE roles started to become standard across the industry, you had people taking up those roles who hadn't been in them before. Kubernetes became popular, and you have a whole new type of like I don't even know, people who write YAML for a living. VR became available in consumer products. You have a lot of, you have people who like jump in and start learning how like VR and AR work and building applications on that. I guess I should have put this on the slide, but I just thought of it now. Remember when crypto became popular and you had a lot of people saying, I'm going to become a crypto engineer now. Those are all really good examples of people switching disciplines when something new happens. Uh, okay, back to our story. I'm leading a team of 8-ish people doing build engineering for iOS stuff. And I decided I was done. It was pretty unusual, even inside of a really big tech company at the time. I worked at Block. I was leading a good-sized team, and I was the clear domain expert, and I flew around the world giving talks about the stuff that my team was doing, and I had built the team's roadmap for the first couple of years, and I'd built the team from a team of 1 to like 8, and I said, I'm done. And that's not very common. Maybe it should be. So, as I wrote in my farewell email to my team, they were ready for me to go. They were set up to succeed without me. I had amassed all this technical depth over a previous like decade, and I'd taught it to the other people on my team. It was a team of like 8 people. I already wasn't writing a lot of code. I was instead having, meetings and reviewing documents and wondering when I would get to write code again. I'd set up a roadmap and worked with each teammate to help them plan out a path to achieve goals for the next like 6 to 9 months. And it just felt like the team was ready to go on without me. And leaving that team made room for other people to grow. When one door closes, another door opens. Well, when one tech lead leaves the team, another person usually gets a chance to be a tech lead and grow in many of the sort of soft skill areas that I had taken over a lot of the team's responsibility for. So there was only one team that did what I did. There was only one iOS build engineering team in a company of 10,000 people. And there were dozens of other teams doing dozens of other things. And that's always going to be true. There's almost always going to be more areas that you're not working in than those that you are working in. And being open to changing up what you're doing opens a lot of possibilities. Also, honestly, I was just ready for a change. I wanted something new. I wanted to switch teams, and my current one wasn't working for me. And so the only real option to switching teams, if no other team was doing the work that I was doing, was to change up the work I was doing. And so that meant that me, this tech lead on the team, had to switch and learn something new. So I did. I hopped over to a team that was like building product and doing like Kotlin microservices in the cloud and all of that fun stuff, which was totally different from anything I'd ever done before. But the wrinkle in there is I was expected to go onto this new team and be their tech lead. So, what changes when you do that? Everything. So I couldn't resist. Yeah, a lot changes, of course. You've changed teams, you've changed up what you're doing. There's some obvious stuff that changes, like you're probably changing the language you write in, like going from, Ruby to Kotlin, or from writing one dialect of YAML to another dialect of YAML. You're changing up the languages and the libraries and the frameworks that you use. I went from being a build engineer who was working on a lot of stuff with Bazel to working in like a microservice framework called MISC that the company had built. Also, your job title changes. You get to post on LinkedIn and have your moment as a thought leader. There's also some less obvious things that change when you do this. Who you follow on Twitter changes. You probably want to seek out people who are, posting things that are relevant to your new job. The architecture patterns that you think in. When you start working on like microservices, you think about, well, how can I do everything in Kafka? Everything's gRPC, and I write my design docs in protobufs. And I'd never done that before. The conferences you speak at change, because guess what? If you're not working on something, it's kind of hard to talk about it for 45 minutes at a time at a conference. How comfortable you feel. It's pretty comfortable to do something you've been doing for years and years. It's a lot less comfortable to be that really senior person on the team who's like, well, I don't know how to do this, or I see you doing this in your pull request and it doesn't really make sense to me, but I feel like I should know the answer. It's also going to be pretty challenging. You're a senior engineer, you're expected to come in and day one be productive and have an impact on the team. That's hard when you're doing something new and you're learning. You make a change like that, even though you're still a technical expert, you're no longer a domain expert in what you're working in. You maintain all that experience that you had in like general software engineering. You haven't forgotten how to write any sorting algorithms that you probably had to do in a whiteboard interview or something like that. But you no longer really know the domain that you're working in. You have questions about the edge cases for the APIs you use. You can't just write idiomatic code with your eyes closed anymore, unless I guess you can touch type, and then you can always write code with your eyes closed. This one was really weird for me, but more junior teammates will know more than you. It feels weird, but your teammates will know the code base and the language and the frameworks better than you do. They'll even be sort of more comfortable with the team dynamics than you are. They'll know which meetings you can skip and which you're expected to show up for. They'll know, this was a weird one for me, they'll know when you're expected to post on Slack about a change you're making and when the bot is going to post that for you. I remember doing my first deploy and feeling really silly when I had manually posted, hey, I'm deploying staging. I post that. I click the button to deploy staging, and the Slack bot's like, Sam is deploying staging. I have a million more examples. Coming from a mobile background, I was like, okay, we have this task that every, 30 minutes scans the database and finds some work to do. And I was like, oh, well, in this task, we'll just find the things and do the work. And apparently I've learned that's a big no-no. You have to then enqueue things onto a job queue so that you don't block any other work that's going on because your system has more than one user, and in a mobile app there's one user, running in the process. And there's just tons of those things that everyone else on the team knew, and I had to learn. And it just felt weird. I was used to knowing everything. Okay, so a bunch changes. Some stuff also stays the same. You're still you. If you were a good team leader on your old team, doing your old job and your old discipline, you're still going to be a good team leader. If you're a funny teammate who made people laugh and stand up, well, assuming your new team has a good sense of humor, you'll still be a funny teammate who can make people laugh and stand up. If you're good at reviewing code, you'll still be helpful as a code reviewer. If you're an empathetic mentor, working with people on your team and helping them grow, you still have that. That's stuff that is sort of who you are as a person or as a professional. It's less tied to the code that you're writing every day. That's not changing. No one's taking that away from you when you move from being developing A to developing B. In that same vein, you still have everything that you knew about that sort of lead part of being a tech lead. Reviewing design docs, you know what to look for. You know to ask, hey, what happens when an error happens? You know to say, this section on how we're going to roll out changes is missing. Can you tell me what you're thinking about that? You still know how to ask questions and say, I see you're doing this. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me what this does? Can you walk me through how our code base works? Can you go through what stuff isn't working for our team? One of my favorite things to do whenever I join a new team is ask, like, hey, what do people hate most about working on this team? And I've learned I don't have to understand the answers. I just need to sort of write them down and come back to them. And as long as you sort of fix those things, your teammates will love you. No one will ever complain because they get woken up less at night by the pager. You still know how to meet with people. Big part of my job as a tech lead was and still is like having a weekly one-on-one with teammates, having a weekly one-on-one with my product manager, talking with designers when needed, communicating roadmaps to sort of director level people. Nothing took away my ability to do that, to communicate. Mentoring is just I think a huge part of being a good engineer, a good employee, a good teammate. And a lot of mentoring is just listening, being empathetic, sometimes being self-deprecating and sharing embarrassing stories about yourself to make someone else feel better. I like doing that. That's part of being a leader. Talked a bit about this earlier. You still know how to think about edge cases. You still know sort of what best practices are. Like, that tests are good and deploying to production before going out for lunch on a Friday is bad. You know that like writing things down is good and making random changes without telling anyone is bad. And you know how to explain to your team why the good thing is good and the bad thing is bad. and you can still be curious. You can still look at things and want to know why they are the way they are, why something is a best practice that someone says you have to do. Um, you can still just look at what's going on and think, how does this impact the business? Um, you know, how can we deliver, I don't know, deliver shareholder value? Um, I've picked up a lot of sarcasm for business talk in my years. One of these days it's going to come back to bite me. I'm still waiting for that to happen. So I've spent a lot of time when I was at Block sitting on promotion panels. So sort of reading these monumentally long Google Docs that explained why someone deserved to be promoted to the next level. I love doing that, one of my favorite part of the job. But I gained a lot of perspective about what makes someone a senior engineer, what makes someone an effective senior engineer, and also where people could fall short. And a pattern I noticed is that those lead type skills, those leadership skills, they're sometimes called soft skills, and I don't really love that terminology. Those skills, having them, is what led people being promoted to sort of senior and staff levels. The technical depth piece almost never is what prevented someone from getting a promotion. And so you change disciplines, you're going to have to lean on those skills while you get up to speed with the code. It is going to take time to get up to speed with the code, even more so than just sort of the normal starting a new job, needing to figure out where everything is. There's just a lot of patterns you have to pick up on. But from day one, you can lean on those leadership skills. You can be curious. You can mentor your teammates. You can push for best practices. You can review code. And at the same time, you can keep an open mind, ask questions. Be willing to accept that this new discipline sometimes does things differently for a reason. Recognize that some of the ways you've always done things won't be right for this new team. And that's okay. You're here to learn that there's other ways to be right in this new situation. A really common example of this that I've seen is like testing and deployment practices. What works for one discipline doesn't work for another. Writing a million integration tests might be great for an iOS app that's super interactive and has a bunch of different screens. And it might be really, really slow if you are writing a backend app that has a database and you're like wiping it in between each test. That stuff's going to be different. It's a lot easier to test a server application than it is to test the YAML for your Kubernetes deployment. It's a lot easier to write unit tests than it is to understand the implications of changing instance sizes in your Terraform. I've caused outages that way, I'm sorry. Yeah, but still, be comfortable knowing that you are still a senior engineer. No one's taking that away from you. You're hopefully, not taking a pay cut or a title downgrade by changing disciplines. You still have a lot of experience. You still know, all the sorting algorithms that you're going to be asked in interviews. You still know how to whiteboard. But, more seriously, you do have a lot of skills, and that will be apparent to the people around you. My dad, when I was little, used to always tell me, like, Sam, you don't have to tell everyone how smart you are. They'll they'll figure it out. Um, he might be right. I haven't tried out his advice yet. But people can see if if you are a good senior engineer, people are going to notice that. They'll catch on pretty quickly. They'll notice that you ask good questions. They'll notice that you're helpful. They'll notice that you're curious and you're making quick progress in picking things up. They'll be happy to have you around. You know, don't worry about appearing ignorant by asking, those like silly questions. Instead, take that as an example. Demonstrate to the team that, everyone, even the tech lead, doesn't know everything. Um, Document things that the team hasn't documented yet. Be the person who's going to say, hey, there's all this stuff that I just learned. I'm going to write the best onboarding guide this team has ever seen. And have fun. You switched roles for a reason, I hope. Okay, so is it worth it to do all this? Is it worth it to give up working in the discipline that you've got a decade of experience in, that you've amassed a bunch of expertise in, that you feel really comfortable in? You feel like an expert and a specialist, and go to something new? Before I answer that, let's recap a bit. So you are a tech lead, and you're thinking about switching disciplines and staying a tech lead, and now you're aware of what's going to change and what will stay the same. Seniority as an engineer always requires depth. Sort of these like staff plus engineers are always technical experts in something. But if you're already at that point, you have a choice between adding extra depth and adding breadth if you want to continue growing in your career. There's this idea of like these different shapes of engineers. I'm sure this comes out of some business school journal. I'm not sure which, so no citations, but I've heard it repeated enough. There's the notion of an I-shaped engineer. They have a lot of depth, but lack sort of generalist skills. You have like a dash-shaped engineer. So they're broad generalists, but lack areas of expertise. And finally, you have T-shaped engineers, and they're both. They have general skills, and they have areas of deep expertise. And as a tech lead, you sort of naturally grow into a T-shaped engineer. You have technical depth. That's why you're the technical leader of your team. But in that position, you also learn a bunch of generalizable soft skills. Working with the manager to do planning, working with product management to fit, into your organization's roadmap and vision. But with time, that breadth, at least for me, began to feel a bit narrow and limiting. I was only working in the developer empowerment organization. I only had worked on mobile. I didn't get to work with different types of cross-functional partners. Like, say, you don't have a lot of designers working in build engineering related roles. I didn't work with data scientists or lawyers. I have worked with some really fun product lawyers. They can be good sometimes. So I felt limited, and I switched. I felt like I'd stopped growing. I looked around and decided that I was a bit hemmed in, and I wanted more choice in where my career would go, 5 or 10 years down the road. And I looked around within the company. One of the benefits of being at, a 10,000 person company is there are a lot of teams and a lot of managers, and I found one that I trusted, and I explained that I was a fast learner and I wanted this change. And now I'm qualified for so many more types of roles. Um, there are only so many companies that hire like specialist build engineers. There are a lot more companies that will hire like back-end software developers. And I actually changed jobs a few months ago. Um, and when I was looking at the market, I just had so many more options. There were a lot of places that would hire people who knew how to build microservices. And I still knew how to do mobile. I still knew how to do build systems. And now I'd added this other thing that I could do. And due to my experience now, like working on a product team and building things that way, I knew I could work with product managers and designers and data scientists and machine learning people and, yes, lawyers too. And I could also prove that I could learn new things. I was a fast learner, and hey, if I was going to do something new again, I felt confident it would work out, and I had proof on my resume that it would indeed work out. So, back to the question that prompted this recap. Is it worth it to switch disciplines when you're a tech lead? So, I have to give this answer, right? Yeah, I couldn't stand up here for 40 minutes and then say, you know what, disregard everything I've done, don't do it. Yeah, I'd say it was worth it. But I have to caveat that. It's worth it if you're interested in learning and growing and challenging yourself, and really looking to like continue on that so-called staff plus track. People who really do more than just write code or work on their one team's architecture. And it's a really scary change to make. Leaving behind what you're comfortable with, what you're familiar with, what you know you're good at, what other people know you're good at, and what you're known for. That was hard. I had it in my like bio. I was a build engineer. I worked on developer tools. Like I think I actually still need to update my conference speaker bio, because I'm not working on developer tools full time anymore. It had become that ingrained in my identity, this is what I do. And it was scary to change that up. But it worked out. I'm here. I'm still able to talk about the things that make me a good engineer. I'm still, I hope, a useful member of my team. And now there's just more stuff that I've got under my belt. So, yeah, I'd say it was worth it. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So my question is um, rather provocative, and I'm pretty sure that you'll contradict it. But I'm still interested. Don't you think that that you multiply your hard skill, your tech skills by your soft or leadership skills? So if you have limited technical skills, it's very hard to be an effective leader, to be trusted, and to really lead the team. Don't you think that those leadership skills are hollow without technical expertise?
Not necessarily, but I'd say you still have technical skills. They're just different technical skills. You know how to, evaluate, proposals that are put in front of you. You know how to like read and write code. It's not that you don't have technical skills when you change disciplines. You just have a different set of technical skills, which I think is very different than not being technical or not having technical skills at all.
Thank you for your presentation, and I have two questions. First question is, what do you think is different between tech lead and team lead in your opinion? And second question is related to the previous question. So don't you think is it more logical to work as a like developer first in your discipline and then became a tech lead? And how it was like from your experience, why you not choosing this approach?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, um, I think my answer is biased by like the different types of companies that I've worked in and the way that they're organized. But when I think of team lead, that's usually like a manager, a people manager that people report to. And a tech lead is someone who's an individual contributor on the team who's, um, you know, usually like in charge of technical decisions, but still like reports to the team lead and still is a peer to the other people on the team. To answer the second question about, is it easier to just be like a regular developer on the team? It might be easier, but I view, at least for me, a large part of my job as being a leader. And I feel that that's a lot of what I bring to the table, to the team that I'm on. And even if it was going to be hard for me to be like a tech lead from day one, I didn't want to be in a position where the team I was moving to already had a tech lead. And what was I then going to do? What role would I have? It was a lot easier for me to sort of have a really challenging like month of getting up to speed and being able to do the job I wanted than settling for a job that I felt wouldn't be as fulfilling to me.
Any more questions around? There we go. So, what is that your favorite, most embarrassing story about yourself?
Let's see. There was the time I fell off a hammock when I was 9. That was pretty embarrassing. Sort of more relevant. I distinctly remember a time when I just switched teams and I was working on a new feature and I'd written some code and I deployed it to staging and one of my more junior teammates had said like no don't do this, do it this way because this is how we do it in this other place, and like linked me to code, and I said, well, I think I know what I'm doing. It's fine. It was not fine. And it was actually the sort of example I gave of like we were doing things in a recurring task and there was an error, and because everything happened in that one task, like one object, like when processing one object errored, everything else errored, and so the graph of like the backlog of tasks just was going like that. And like technically speaking, is that a super embarrassing mistake? No, but it was really embarrassing because I I had said I don't need your help. I know what I'm doing, and that was completely wrong. And I should have been more willing to like listen to my teammate, even if they didn't have a great reason for why we did things. I was just like I was arrogant, and I was arrogant in a way that someone could like find the comment on the pull request where I said the thing. So that felt pretty embarrassing when I was like, this is not going to happen, this is fine. And it happened.
Okay, thank you. That's Samuel Giddins, everybody. Let's give him a round of applause. So you can catch Samuel in the corridors today after all the sessions, and of course at the party later tomorrow, I believe. We're gonna have a few minutes break, and we'll continue with the last session here to hear about some cool kids. Oh, you can also catch the Lithuanian CTO Awards if you're still interested. It's in room Alpha.
Thanks.